My daughter took my mountain villa and gave it to her husband's family, saying, "Now it's theirs. You're not allowed to come here anymore." I smiled and nodded, hiding my anger. But when they came to move in, I prepared a surprise for them that they would never forget. They were shocked by what they saw. I'm Bob Thompson, 52 years old, and I never thought my own daughter would betray me like this. But sometimes life teaches you that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. You know that feeling when everything you've worked for your entire life suddenly feels like it's slipping away? That's exactly where I found myself on a Friday afternoon in late spring, standing in the driveway of my own mountain villa, wondering how the hell my daughter had gotten there before me. I slammed the truck door and grabbed my weekend duffel bag, already picturing the quiet hours ahead overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. These 3 days of peace at my villa were exactly what I needed after another exhausting week managing Thompson Logistics Solutions back in Atlanta. The 2-hour drive through Georgia's winding mountain roads had been therapeutic, watching the cityscape give way to rolling hills, and finally those majestic peaks that Sarah and I had fallen in love with 15 years ago. Sarah. Even 2 years after losing her to cancer, I still found myself planning conversations with her during these drives. She'd have laughed at my road rage when some tourist in a rental car nearly took out my side mirror back in Helen. She'd have reminded me to stop for groceries in Dahlonega instead of hoping the villa's pantry still had something edible from my last visit 3 weeks ago. But something was definitely wrong today. 2 figures in white bathrobes stood on my private deck, coffee mugs steaming in their hands like they belonged there. My daughter Ashley leaned against the railing, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun in a way that reminded me painfully of her mother. Behind her, a man I recognized as her husband Nathan shifted uncomfortably when he spotted my truck pulling up the gravel drive. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, my bag slipping from suddenly numb fingers and hitting the ground with a dull thud. Ashley straightened up when she saw me, her whole posture changing from relaxed to defensive. Her face hardened into an expression I'd never seen before, not even during her worst teenage rebellion years when she'd screamed that she hated me for making her come home before midnight. This was different, colder, more calculated. The way she looked at me now, it was like I was some unwanted stranger who'd wandered onto her property by mistake. "Dad, you can't stay here," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard with the kind of sharp authority that made my chest tighten. "Nathan and I are planning a romantic weekend." I blinked hard, certain I'd misheard her. This was my villa. The deed sitting in my Atlanta safe had my name on it, bought with money I'd earned, building Thompson Logistics from a single delivery truck into Georgia's largest independent shipping company. Sarah and I had picked out every piece of furniture together, every light fixture, every paint color. We'd spent countless weekends here during our marriage, planning for the day we could retire and make this our permanent home. But Ashley, "This is my villa," I started, my voice trailing off as the complete absurdity of having to state this obvious fact hit me like a slap. "I don't care." She set her coffee mug down on the deck railing with a sharp clink that echoed off the mountain silence. "We were here first, and we're not leaving." Nathan mumbled something I couldn't quite catch from where I stood, but Ashley waved him off with an impatient gesture. Her bathrobe had fallen open slightly in the mountain breeze, and she pulled it tighter around herself with what looked like an angry jerk. "Honey, I drove 2 hours to get here," I said, taking a tentative step toward the front door that I'd painted myself just last summer. "I just wanted to spend the weekend here, maybe do some fishing, catch up on reading." "Get out of here and don't bother us." Ashley's voice rose to an actual shout that probably carried all the way down to the nearest neighbor a quarter-mile away. "You're just in the way anyway." Those words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. In the way? This was my property, my retreat, the place where Sarah and I had planned to grow old together, where I came to feel close to her memory when the loneliness in my Atlanta house became too much to bear. I stood there frozen, my weekend bag at my feet, staring at my only child as she glared at me from the deck of my own home. Nathan looked everywhere except directly at me, his face flushed red above his bathrobe collar. He seemed as uncomfortable with this confrontation as I was, but clearly wasn't going to speak up against his wife. 28 years old, and Ashley was ordering me off my own property like I was some unwanted door-to-door salesman. This was the same girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories about princesses and dragons. who'd called me daddy until she turned 16 and decided it wasn't cool anymore, who'd sobbed in my arms at her mother's funeral and promised we'd always take care of each other. Sarah's gentle voice whispered through my memory, "Be patient with her, Bob. She's still processing the grief from losing me. Give her time to work through it." 2 years. I'd given her 2 years of patience, of understanding, of bending over backward to accommodate her moods and demands. Every time she'd called asking for money to cover her rent, I'd written the check without question. When she'd needed help with her wedding expenses, I'd covered the entire reception at the country club because Nathan's family claimed they were going through a rough patch financially. When they'd wanted to honeymoon in Europe for 3 weeks, I'd quietly transferred money into their account so they wouldn't have to worry about credit card bills, and this was what all that generosity had gotten me. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word tasting like sawdust in my mouth. "Fine, I'll go." I bent down to pick up my weekend bag, my knees creaking with the motion that reminded me I wasn't the young man who'd built this logistics empire from nothing. 52 years old, and my own daughter was treating me like dirt on her shoes. "Good," Ashley called out from the deck, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that made my stomach turn. "Next time call first. Next time call first to use my own property." The words echoed in my head as I walked back to my truck on unsteady legs. Each step felt like a retreat from some battlefield I hadn't even known I was supposed to fight on. Behind me, I heard Ashley's voice softening as she turned back to Nathan, already making plans for their dinner, discussing whether they wanted to drive into town or cook something from whatever groceries they'd brought. The engine of my Ford F-150 turned over with its familiar rumble. American engineering, reliable as always, unlike family, apparently. I backed out of the gravel driveway slowly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. In my rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of Ashley and Nathan as they settled back into the deck chairs that Sarah and I had picked out together at a little furniture shop in Blue Ridge. My daughter raised her coffee mug in what might have been a casual gesture, or might have been a final goodbye. Either way, it felt like a dismissal. The winding mountain road back to Atlanta stretched ahead of me, empty and long. I'd be driving home in defeat, tail between my legs, just like Sarah had always worried I would do whenever Ashley pushed too hard. "You're too soft with her, Bob," Sarah used to say after particularly difficult conversations with our teenage daughter. "Sometimes you need to stand your ground, or she'll walk all over you her whole life." Sarah had been right, as usual, but I'd thought that being the understanding father, the one who always said yes, would somehow make up for all the times I'd had to miss school plays and soccer games because of work emergencies. Thompson Logistics didn't build itself. Those 25 years of 12-hour days, weekend calls from clients, and constant problem-solving had required sacrifices from our whole family. The irony wasn't lost on me that the money I'd made from all those sacrifices had bought the villa that my daughter was now treating like her personal property. By the time I reached the outskirts of Atlanta, the spring sun was setting behind the city's skyline. Traffic on I-285 moved at its usual crawl, giving me plenty of time to replay the afternoon's humiliation in my head. How had I let this happen? When had I become the kind of man who gets ordered around by his own child? My house in Buckhead felt cavernous and silent when I finally pulled into the driveway. Sarah's presence had always filled these rooms with warmth and conversation. Now, 2 years after her death, the silence felt oppressive. I dropped my unused weekend bag by the front door and headed straight for my home office, where at least the familiar clutter of invoices and shipping schedules made some kind of sense. Thompson Logistics Solutions occupied a modest building near Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, but the real work happened here in this office where I'd spent countless late nights building routes, negotiating contracts, and solving the 1,000 small problems that kept freight moving across the Southeast. The business had been my pride and joy, proof that a guy from a working-class family could build something significant through pure determination and smart decisions. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and settled into the leather chair that Sarah had bought me for my 45th birthday. The computer screen showed 47 unread emails, mostly routine stuff from drivers and clients that could wait until Monday. But sitting there in the quiet house, I couldn't stop thinking about Ashley's face when she'd ordered me to leave. There had been something in her expression that went beyond simple rudeness, or even the grief-driven anger I'd been making excuses for since Sarah's death. This felt calculated, planned, like she'd been thinking about this confrontation for a while and had finally worked up the nerve to execute it. The phone sat silent on my desk, and part of me kept expecting it to ring. Maybe Ashley would call to apologize, to explain that the stress of her new marriage had made her say things she didn't mean. Maybe Nathan would call, man to man, to smooth things over and suggest we all sit down for a reasonable conversation about scheduling villa visits. But the phone remained quiet through Saturday evening and all day Sunday. By Monday morning, I had to accept the uncomfortable truth that my daughter wasn't planning to apologize for anything. Monday evening found me nursing lukewarm coffee and picking at the remnants of a solitary dinner of Chinese takeout. 3 days had crawled by since Friday's humiliation at the villa. Saturday, I'd jumped every time the phone rang, expecting Ashley to call with some explanation, maybe even an apology. Sunday brought the uncomfortable realization that maybe I'd been too quick to surrender my ground, just like I always did when family conflicts arose. The logistics business had taught me to be decisive, to stand firm when clients tried to renegotiate contracts at the last minute, or when suppliers attempted to squeeze extra fees out of established agreements. But somehow, when it came to Ashley, all that business backbone seemed to evaporate. Sarah used to call it my daddy reflex, the way I'd cave to Ashley's demands because I couldn't bear to see disappointment in her eyes. Now I was wondering if that daddy reflex had created a monster. The phone's shrill ring cut through my brooding thoughts like a blade. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. Ashley. Dad. Her voice carried none of the warmth I'd desperately hoped for over the weekend. Cold, businesslike, like she was calling to cancel a service contract. Ashley, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. About this weekend, I think we need to... Listen carefully, she cut me off with the same tone she might use to fire an employee. Nathan and I have decided. The villa now belongs to his parents. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. The words didn't make sense, like she was speaking a foreign language. What? Ashley? What are you talking about? Carl and Margaret Walsh. It's their home now. Her words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. You're forbidden from going there anymore. The leather chair creaked as I sat forward, my heart starting to pound in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of the stress tests my doctor had been recommending. Ashley, have you completely lost your mind? You can't just take my property. Actually, I can, and I am. Her voice sharpened to a blade's edge, cutting through any illusion I might have had that this was some kind of misunderstanding. You hardly use it anyway, and Nathan's parents desperately need proper housing. Their lease is up next month and they can't afford the rent increase. 25 years of building Thompson Logistics flashed through my mind in rapid succession. Every permit fight with the city to expand our warehouse space. Every difficult client who'd tried to stiff us on payments. Every sacrifice Sarah and I had made. Every vacation we'd postponed. Every luxury we'd denied ourselves to build something substantial. Something that would last. Something that would provide security for our family's future. It's my villa. The words exploded out of me with surprising force, years of suppressed frustration finally finding their voice. I worked 3 decades to buy that place, Ashley. 3 decades of 60-hour weeks, missed dinners, and choosing between paying your college tuition and taking that European anniversary trip your mother wanted. Ashley's laugh held absolutely no humor. It was a sound I'd never heard from her before, bitter and calculating. You're being ridiculously selfish, Dad. After everything we've done for you since Mom died. Something inside my chest snapped like an overstretched cable. Everything you've done for me? My voice rose to match hers, 2 years of patient accommodation suddenly burning away like tissue paper. What exactly have you done for me, Ashley? Because from where I'm sitting, I can list everything I've done for you since your mother's funeral. I stood up, pacing behind my desk as the words poured out. I paid for your entire wedding because Nathan's family claimed they were broke. I covered your honeymoon to Italy when your credit cards were maxed out. I've been writing checks for your rent every month since you got married because apparently a financial advisor can't manage his own finances. I bought your car, covered your student loans, paid the deposit on that fancy apartment in Midtown. That's what fathers do, she cut me off. But I could hear something different in her voice now, less confident, like maybe she hadn't expected me to actually itemize her dependence. No, Ashley. That's what I chose to do because I love you and wanted to help you get established. But taking my property isn't getting help. It's theft. Besides, her voice turned cruel in a way that made my blood run cold. You're old and alone now. What do you possibly need with such a big villa? It's just going to waste. Old and alone. The phrase hit like a physical blow, but instead of crumpling under it like I had for the past 2 years, I felt something harden inside my chest. Something that had been dormant since Sarah's death was finally waking up. Sarah's gentle voice had whispered from memory about patience and understanding, but Sarah had never heard her daughter speak with such calculated cruelty. The woman who'd married a determined businessman wouldn't have wanted him to become a doormat even for their child. Those are Nathan's parents, Ashley. Complete strangers to me. They're family now, she shot back with the kind of finality that suggested this conversation was already over in her mind. And unlike you, they'll actually appreciate what they're getting. They'll use the space, invite friends over, make it a real home instead of some sad shrine to mom. The comment about Sarah's memory being a sad shrine was the final straw. Every instinct I'd developed in 25 years of business negotiations suddenly came online. No. The simple word seemed to echo in the silence that followed. I could practically hear Ashley's surprise crackling through the phone connection. What did you just say? Ashley's voice carried a note of genuine shock, like she'd never heard that word from me before. And honestly, thinking back on our relationship since Sarah's death, maybe she hadn't. I said no, Ashley. N-O. You're not taking my villa. You're not giving it to Nathan's parents. And you're certainly not forbidding me from my own property. The silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. When Ashley finally spoke again, her voice had taken on a dangerous edge that reminded me uncomfortably of her teenage years when she didn't get her way. You can't stop us, Dad. We've already made arrangements. I have a key. Nathan has a key. And we've told Carl and Margaret they can move in this weekend. It's done. Then they'll be trespassing on my property, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Years of negotiating shipping contracts had taught me that the most effective threats were delivered in the most reasonable tones. Are you seriously going to call the police on your own family? I'm going to call the police on people who are stealing my property, yes. The fact that one of the thieves happens to be my daughter is unfortunate, but it doesn't change the crime. Ashley's breathing was audible through the phone now, sharp and angry. I could picture her pacing around her midtown apartment, the one I'd helped her get, trying to figure out how this conversation had gotten away from her. If you try to interfere with this plan, Nathan and I will cut you out of our lives completely. You'll never see us again. No grandchildren, no holidays, no family. Is that what you want? The threat hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. For a moment, I almost crumbled, almost gave in, just like I had for 2 years whenever Ashley deployed emotional manipulation instead of logic. But something Sarah used to say came back to me with crystal clarity. Bob, you didn't build Thompson Logistics by backing down from bullies. Why would you start now? If that's the price of keeping what I worked my whole life for, I heard myself say, then yes, that's exactly what I want. The line went dead. I sat in the sudden silence of my office, surrounded by photos of Sarah and industry awards from the Georgia Trucking Association. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Righteous anger mixed with a strange sense of liberation. Ashley had just shown me exactly who she'd become since her mother's death. Not the grieving daughter I'd been making excuses for, but someone who thought emotional blackmail was an acceptable negotiation tactic. Someone who believed family relationships guaranteed unlimited access to other people's assets. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. Austin? It's Bob Thompson. Yeah, I know it's late. Listen, I need a favor, and it involves some of that cybersecurity expertise you're always talking about. Austin Rodriguez had been my friend since our Army Reserve days back in the 90s. While I'd gone into logistics after our service ended, Austin had parlayed his military communications training into a successful cybersecurity consulting business. More importantly, He owed me a significant favor from when I'd helped coordinate the logistics for moving his entire ex-wife's household goods across 3 states during their messy divorce. What kind of favor, Bob? You sound like you're ready to declare war on someone, the kind that teaches entitled kids about consequences. Austin's chuckle carried through the phone line. This about Ashley? I'd vented to Austin about my daughter's increasingly demanding behavior during a few too many beers at our monthly veterans meetup. He'd listened without judgment, but I could tell he thought I was being too accommodating. She's trying to steal my mountain place. Says she's giving it to her husband's parents because I'm old and alone and don't deserve it. Jesus, Bob, that's not grief talking anymore. That's straight up greed. I know. And I'm done making excuses for it. Austin was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him thinking, what exactly did you have in mind? Something that'll make them think twice about moving unauthorized guests into my property. I like where this is heading. You want to make the place unwelcoming? I want to make it downright inhospitable to people who aren't supposed to be there. Interesting. You know, I've got some equipment that might help with that. Smart home technology, security systems, automated responses to intruders. All completely legal since it's your property. How quickly could we set something up? For you? How about I swing by your place tomorrow morning and we'll drive up to the mountains together? I've been wanting to see this villa you're always talking about anyway. Austin, I can't ask you to. Bob, you spent 6 months coordinating shipping logistics for my divorce move without charging me a dime. You think I'm going to let some spoiled kid steal your retirement home? Besides, his voice took on the same tone he'd used when we were planning training exercises in the reserves. This sounds like the kind of project that's going to be fun. After we hung up, I poured another bourbon and walked to the window overlooking my backyard. Sarah had planted those rose bushes the year before she got sick. They were blooming now, red and white flowers that she would have loved to cut and bring inside for the dining room table. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said to her memory. I know you wanted me to be patient with Ashley, but patience without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. And I think it's time our daughter learned the difference. Tuesday morning found Austin at my front door at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying what looked like enough electronic equipment to wire a small office building. His pickup truck was loaded with boxes labeled Digital Defense Solutions, and several cases that I assumed contained the specialized gear he'd mentioned. Ready to teach some life lessons? Austin asked with the kind of grin that had gotten us both into trouble during our reserve training days. Austin hadn't changed much in the 15 years since we'd mustered out, still lean and athletic with the kind of focused intensity that made him excellent at solving complex technical problems. His company, Digital Defense Solutions, occupied the entire 15th floor of a glass tower in downtown Atlanta, and his client list included half the Fortune 500 companies in the Southeast. You sure about this? I asked as we loaded his equipment into my truck. I don't want you getting in any legal trouble because of my family drama. Bob, everything we're installing is perfectly legal smart home technology. The fact that we're programming it to be selective about who it responds to favorably is just creative engineering. The 2-hour drive to Blue Ridge gave us plenty of time to plan our strategy. Austin had brought blueprints of smart home systems, photos of motion sensors, and a tablet loaded with programming software that looked like something NASA might use. Here's what I'm thinking, Austin said, spreading the blueprints across the truck's dashboard while I navigated the mountain curbs. We install a comprehensive automation system throughout the villa. Motion detectors, sound sensors, facial recognition cameras, automated lighting, and water systems. Everything responds to your biometric data and voice patterns. And for unauthorized guests? Well, let's just say the house might develop some personality quirks around strangers. Austin's plan was elegant in its simplicity. The villa would become a smart home that recognized me as the primary authorized user. My face, my voice, my movement patterns would trigger normal, comfortable responses from all the automated systems. But when unauthorized people entered the property, especially people trying to establish residence, the house would begin exhibiting behaviors designed to encourage them to leave. Nothing dangerous, Austin assured me as we pulled into the villa's driveway. Nothing that could hurt anyone or cause property damage, but definitely unsettling enough to make people question whether they really want to live there. Seeing the villa again, after Friday's humiliation, brought back a flood of memories. Sarah and I had bought this place 15 years ago, when Thompson Logistics started turning serious profits. We'd spent countless weekends here, planning renovations, hiking the mountain trails, dreaming about retirement. The wraparound deck where Ashley had dismissed me so coldly was where Sarah and I had shared morning coffee and evening wine for over a decade. "Nice place," Austin said, surveying the property with a professional eye. "Good sight lines, multiple entry points, decent isolation from neighbors. This is going to work perfectly." We spent the next hour walking through every room while Austin took measurements and photos. The villa had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a large open-concept living area, and the deck that overlooked a spectacular view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sarah had insisted on the stone fireplace, and I'd built the custom bookshelves myself during a particularly ambitious weekend project. "Security system first," Austin said, unpacking his first box of equipment. Cameras with facial recognition at every entrance, motion sensors in all the main rooms, sound detection throughout the house. I watched him work with the kind of methodical precision that had made him invaluable during our military service. Each camera was positioned to capture clear images of anyone entering the property, while remaining virtually invisible to casual observation. The motion sensors looked like standard home security equipment, but Austin's programming would make them far more sophisticated than any commercial system. "These cameras will create a database of authorized and unauthorized users," Austin explained as he calibrated the facial recognition software. "Your face gets green light responses from all systems. Ashley and Nathan get yellow light status, which means the house will tolerate them but won't be particularly welcoming. Anyone else, especially people trying to move in furniture or establish residence, gets red light treatment." "What exactly does red light treatment involve?" Austin's grin was positively diabolical. "Ever hear of psychological operations? Same principle, different application." The sound system was Austin's masterpiece. He installed speakers throughout the villa, hidden behind furniture and inside walls, connected to a central computer that could generate audio responses to specific triggers. The system could produce whispers that seemed to come from empty rooms, footsteps that echoed from unoccupied areas, and subtle audio distortions that would make people question what they were hearing. "The beauty of this," Austin explained as he programmed the audio responses, "is that it's all responsive. When you're here alone, the house behaves perfectly normally. But when unauthorized people try to settle in, especially at night when they're trying to sleep, the place becomes atmospheric." By afternoon, we'd installed motion-activated lighting that could create the illusion of movement throughout the house, automated window blinds that could open and close seemingly at random, and a sprinkler system that could be triggered by specific motion patterns. "The sprinklers are my favorite touch," Austin said as he tested the bathroom systems. "Anyone who tries to take a shower without proper authorization is going to get a very cold surprise." As the sun began setting behind the mountains, Austin ran final diagnostics on all the systems. Every sensor was calibrated, every camera was recording, every automated response was programmed and tested. "There's one more thing," Austin said, pulling a small device from his toolkit. "This is a remote override. If you ever need to shut down all the systems instantly, just press this button. But honestly, Bob, I don't think you're going to need it." We stood on the deck where Ashley had humiliated me just 4 days earlier, watching the last light fade from the mountain peaks. "Your daughter has no idea what she's walking into," Austin said with satisfaction, packing up his tools as darkness settled over the mountains. "This system is going to make their weekend very memorable." "I almost feel sorry for Nathan's parents," I admitted, though the sympathy was limited. "They're probably just going along with Ashley's plan without knowing the whole story. Bob, anyone who accepts stolen property without asking questions deserves whatever consequences come their way. Besides, nothing we've installed will actually harm them. It'll just make them very, very uncomfortable." We drove back to Atlanta in comfortable silence, both of us satisfied with the day's work. Austin had created something that was part smart home, part psychological warfare, and completely legal. The villa would appear perfectly normal during any casual inspection, but living there as an unauthorized resident would become increasingly unpleasant. Wednesday and Thursday crawled by with agonizing slowness. I threw myself into work at Thompson Logistics, trying to distract myself with shipping schedules and client meetings, but my mind kept wandering to the mountain villa and whatever Ashley had planned for the weekend. Thursday afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door with a puzzled expression. "Mr. Thompson, There's a Preston Hayes on line 2. Says he's your attorney and it's urgent. Preston Hayes had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years, ever since our kids had played Little League baseball together. He was the kind of small-town lawyer who knew everybody's business and had a gift for explaining complex legal concepts in terms that normal people could understand. "Bob, we need to talk," Preston said without preamble. "I just got a very interesting call from a lawyer in Atlanta representing someone named Nathan Walsh." My blood pressure spiked instantly. "What kind of call?" "The kind where they're asking about property ownership records for your Blue Ridge villa. Specifically, they wanted to know if there were any liens, co-owners, or transfer documents that might affect clear title." I leaned back in my chair trying to process what this meant. They're actually researching how to steal my property legally. That's exactly what they're doing. And Bob, the fact that they're involving lawyers suggests this isn't some impulsive family dispute. This is a calculated attempt to acquire your property through legal manipulation. What did you tell them? Nothing, of course. Attorney-client privilege. But I wanted to give you a heads up that they're serious about this, more serious than you might have realized. After hanging up with Preston, I sat in my office trying to wrap my head around the magnitude of Ashley's betrayal. She wasn't just having an emotional outburst or making empty threats. She was actually consulting lawyers, researching property law, building a case to take my villa permanently. The phone call I'd been expecting finally came Friday morning at exactly 9:15 a.m. "Dad." Ashley's voice was crisp and businesslike, like she was calling to confirm a delivery appointment. "Just wanted to let you know that Nathan and I are driving up to the villa this afternoon. Carl and Margaret are moving in this weekend, and we want to make sure everything's ready for them. Ashley, I've already told you that your opinion doesn't matter anymore. We're doing this whether you like it or not." Her casual dismissal of my feelings was almost more insulting than the actual theft. "Be my guest," I said, surprising her with my calm tone. "I hope you all enjoy your stay." The confusion in her voice was almost comical. "You're not going to fight this?" "Ashley, you've made your position very clear. I'm just an old man who's in the way. Far be it from me to interfere with your plans." "Good. Maybe you're finally learning to be reasonable." "Oh, I'm being very reasonable. In fact, I think this weekend is going to be a real education for everyone involved." There was something in my tone that must have concerned her, because she paused before responding. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all, sweetheart. Just that sometimes life has a way of teaching us lessons we didn't expect to learn." After Ashley hung up, I called Austin to give him the heads up. "They're moving in this weekend?" Austin's voice carried barely contained excitement. "Perfect. All systems are green and ready. I've been monitoring the villa remotely, and everything's functioning exactly as programmed. Any chance they'll figure out what's happening?" "Bob, even if they suspect something, they'll never be able to prove it. Everything we installed looks like standard smart home equipment. The programming is sophisticated enough that it could easily be explained as system malfunctions or quirky automation responses." Friday evening, I tried to distract myself with dinner and a movie, but my mind kept wandering to the villa. Austin had installed remote monitoring capabilities so he could track when people entered the property and how the systems were responding, but he'd insisted that I shouldn't watch the feed directly. "Trust me," he'd said. "You'll enjoy it more if you experience the results rather than watching the process." Saturday morning brought unseasonably warm weather, perfect for moving furniture and settling into a new home. I spent the day working in my garden, pruning Sarah's rose bushes and trying not to think about what was happening 2 hours north in the mountains. The call came Saturday evening at exactly 8:47 p.m. "What did you do?" Ashley's voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. Gone was the confident, dismissive tone from our previous conversations. This Ashley sounded panicked and confused. "I'm sorry," I said mildly, settling back into my recliner with a glass of bourbon that I'd been saving for this moment. "The house. Something's wrong with the house." "What seems to be the problem, sweetheart?" "The lights keep flickering. The sprinklers turned on by themselves while Margaret was trying to make dinner. Carl swears he heard footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs." "Old houses can be quirky," I said in the most reasonable tone I could manage. "Mountain properties especially. Sometimes the electrical systems act up. Maybe you should call a contractor. This isn't normal house problems." Nathan's mother is convinced there's something supernatural going on. "Supernatural?" I chuckled softly into the phone. Ashley, honey, I think the stress of the situation might be getting to you. Maybe you and Nathan should come home and let his parents find somewhere else to stay. Don't patronize me. I know you did something. The bathroom faucets started running cold water in the middle of Margaret's shower. The window blinds are opening and closing by themselves, and Carl nearly had a heart attack when the sound system started playing weird noises at 3 a.m. Austin's psychological operations programming was working even better than we'd hoped. I took a sip of bourbon and tried to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Sweetheart, I'm in Atlanta. I have no idea what you're talking about. Have you tried turning the electrical system off and on again? Sometimes that helps with glitches. This isn't a glitch. Ashley's voice climbed toward full hysteria. The house is acting like it doesn't want us here. Houses don't have feelings, Ashley. Maybe Nathan's parents aren't as comfortable with mountain living as they thought they'd be. The line went dead with enough force that I could picture her throwing the phone. Austin called 20 minutes later, barely able to contain his laughter. Bob, you should see the remote monitoring feed. They've got every light in the house turned on. They're huddled together in the living room like they're under siege, and Carl keeps jumping every time the automated systems make their scheduled adjustments. Any actual problems with the equipment? None at all. Everything's functioning exactly as programmed. The facial recognition system identified them as unauthorized users the moment they walked in with moving boxes, and it's been treating them accordingly ever since. Sunday brought 3 more frantic calls from Ashley, each more desperate than the last. The Walsh family had apparently spent Saturday night awake in shifts, convinced that the house was haunted by some malevolent presence. Every time they tried to settle in or unpack their belongings, some new system malfunction would disrupt their efforts. The coffee maker won't work for them, Ashley reported during her second call. But when Nathan tried it, it worked perfectly fine. Margaret thinks the house has something against her personally. Maybe she should try saying please, I suggested helpfully. By Sunday evening, Ashley's voice had taken on the desperate edge of someone who was running out of options. Fine, you win. Nathan's parents are leaving, but this isn't over between us. I'm not sure what you think I've won, Ashley. I'm just an old man sitting in his Atlanta house, remember? Monday morning brought the news I'd been hoping for. Austin called while I was having my morning coffee, his voice filled with professional pride. They're gone, Bob. Left at about 6 a.m. this morning with a U-Haul truck and everything they'd moved in over the weekend. The Walsh family lasted exactly 36 hours before the villa convinced them they didn't want to live there. Any damage to the property? None whatsoever. They were very careful not to break anything, probably because they were afraid of making the haunting worse. Your villa is in perfect condition and ready for your next visit. I should have felt satisfied with this victory, but something was nagging at me. Ashley's final threat that this isn't over suggested she might escalate the situation rather than accept defeat, and Preston's warning about Nathan consulting lawyers made me realize this conflict was far from finished. That afternoon, I called Preston Hayes to schedule a meeting. I need to explore some legal options, I told him. Estate planning, asset protection, that sort of thing. This about your daughter's property grab? This about making sure it can never happen again. Tuesday morning found me in Preston's comfortable office overlooking Blue Ridge's main street. He'd been practicing law in this small mountain town for 30 years, and his experience with family property disputes was extensive. Bob, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? Preston asked, spreading various legal documents across his conference table. I want to put my villa permanently beyond Ashley's reach, something that even a team of lawyers can't undo. Preston nodded thoughtfully. There are several options. We could set up a trust, create a charitable remainder interest, or establish a conservation easement. Each has different implications for your continued use of the property and what happens after your death. Walk me through them. For the next 2 hours, Preston explained the intricacies of estate planning with the kind of patience that had made him successful in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. By the time we finished, I had a clear understanding of my options and their consequences. The irrevocable charitable trust is probably your best bet, Preston concluded. You transfer ownership to a qualified charity but retain lifetime residence rights. The property serves a charitable purpose. You keep full access until you die, and no one can force a sale or challenge the arrangement. And if Ashley tries to contest it, she'd be contesting a charitable donation that's already been completed and accepted. Courts are very reluctant to interfere with legitimate charitable transfers, especially when the donor retains reasonable lifetime use rights. How quickly can we set this up? I know exactly the right charity for this. The Blue Ridge Veterans Foundation provides mountain retreats for disabled veterans dealing with PTSD and physical rehabilitation. They've been looking for properties in this area, and your villa would be perfect for their mission. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ashley had tried to steal my property to help Nathan's parents, but her greed would end up benefiting veterans who actually deserved assistance. Let's do it, I said, signing the preliminary documents that would begin the process. Bob, once we complete this transfer, there's no going back. You'll have full use of the property for the rest of your life, but you won't own it anymore. Preston, I built Thompson Logistics to provide for my family's future. If my family doesn't want to be part of that future, then I'm happy to support people who've actually served their country. By Friday afternoon, all the paperwork was complete. The Blue Ridge Veterans Foundation now owned my villa, with an irrevocable lifetime residence clause that guaranteed my access until death. Preston had worked with remarkable efficiency, coordinating with the charity's board of directors and filing all the necessary documents with the county clerk's office. It's bulletproof, Bob, Preston assured me as I signed the final transfer documents. No one can contest this arrangement, force a sale, or claim ownership rights. The property now serves veterans in need, and you maintain full residential privileges as the donor. I felt a strange sense of relief as I handed back the signed papers. For the first time since Sarah's death, my most valuable asset was completely protected from Ashley's manipulation. She could threaten, cajole, or hire a team of lawyers, but the villa was now permanently beyond her reach. There is one more thing, Preston said, pulling an additional document from his briefcase. The Veterans Foundation wants to offer you a position as volunteer coordinator for their retreat program. It's unpaid, but it would give you a sense of purpose and help other people at the same time. The idea appealed to me more than I'd expected. Thompson Logistics practically ran itself these days, and I'd been struggling to find meaningful ways to spend my time since Sarah's death. Helping veterans recover from their service-related trauma seemed like a worthy use of my remaining years. I'd like that, I said, accepting the volunteer coordinator agreement. When do I start? Whenever you're ready. They're planning to start the retreat program in the fall, which gives you time to get familiar with their mission and help design the programs. That evening, I called Austin to give him the update and arrange for removal of the smart home systems. You sure you want me to take everything down? Austin asked. I mean, it worked perfectly. Maybe you should leave some basic security in place. The villa serves a different purpose now. I don't want veterans dealing with psychological warfare technology when they're trying to heal from their own trauma. Fair point. I'll drive up this weekend and remove everything. Should have it back to normal by Sunday evening. Thanks, Austin, for everything. I couldn't have pulled this off without your help. Bob, watching your daughter learn that actions have consequences was worth the price of admission. Sometimes the good guys actually win. I should have known that Ashley wouldn't give up easily. The phone call came Monday evening, just as I was reviewing some logistics contracts and enjoying the peaceful quiet of my house. Dad, we need to talk. Ashley's voice was tight with determination and what sounded like barely controlled rage. Nathan and I are coming over, and we're bringing Carl and Margaret. This has gone far enough. That's fine, honey. I'll be here. An hour later, Ashley, Nathan, and Nathan's parents sat in my living room like a tribunal preparing to deliver judgment. Carl and Margaret Walsh looked older than I'd expected, probably in their late 60s, with the kind of tired expressions that suggested they'd been through significant financial stress recently. Ashley had clearly prepared for this confrontation. She sat forward in her chair, hands folded, wearing the kind of serious expression that she probably thought made her look mature and reasonable. Dad, we know you did something to the house, she began without preamble, her voice carrying the tone of someone who'd rehearsed this speech multiple times. I did a lot of things to that house over the years. Sarah and I built it together, renovated it, maintained it. Could you be more specific? Nathan leaned forward, trying to project authority he didn't quite possess. Mr. Thompson, Carl and Margaret are traumatized by what happened up there. They think the place is haunted. They're afraid to go back to any mountain property now. Mountain living isn't for everyone, I said mildly. The isolation, the unfamiliar sounds, the way old houses settle and creak. Some people find it unsettling. Carl spoke for the first time, his voice small and confused. Sir, with all due respect, what we experienced wasn't normal house sounds. The electrical systems were malfunctioning in ways that seemed almost intentional. Old wiring can be unpredictable. I've been meaning to have an electrician take a look at the whole system. Ashley slammed her hand on my coffee table with enough force to make her wedding ring click against the glass. Stop playing games. We know you sabotaged something. The house was fine when we visited before, but the minute Carl and Margaret tried to move in, everything went crazy. Ashley, I think you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should see someone about these paranoid thoughts. Paranoid? Her voice climbed toward hysteria. The house was attacking us. Lights flickering, water systems malfunctioning, sounds coming from empty rooms. Honey, houses don't attack people. Maybe you need to consider that the stress of trying to redistribute your father's property is affecting your mental health. Nathan's face went pale at my choice of words. We weren't trying to steal anything. Ashley told me you'd agreed to let us use the villa to help my parents. I turned to look at my daughter, who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Ashley told you I'd agreed to give my property to complete strangers? She said. Nathan's voice trailed off as he processed what he'd just learned. She said you were happy to help family get established. The silence stretched for nearly a minute while Nathan absorbed the reality of his wife's deception. When he finally turned to look at Ashley, his expression was pure betrayal. You told me he was on board with this plan. Ashley's voice was barely a whisper. I thought I could convince him. By taking his property without permission? It's not stealing if it's family. Margaret Walsh had been quietly crying during this exchange, and now she spoke up with the kind of dignity that comes from a lifetime of disappointment. Ashley, dear, if your father didn't agree to this arrangement, then we had no business being there. We're not charity cases. But you need somewhere to live, Ashley protested. Your lease is up. You can't afford the rent increase, and Dad has this huge villa that he barely uses. I stood up and walked to my desk, returning with the manila folder that contained the legal documents Preston had prepared. Well, this conversation has been illuminating, but there's something you all need to know. I handed Nathan the top document from the folder, watching his face carefully as he began to read. As of this past Friday afternoon, the villa belongs to the Blue Ridge Veterans Foundation. Nathan's hands began to shake as he read the legal papers. This is a charitable transfer, irrevocable donation, complete and permanent, I confirmed. The property now serves disabled veterans who need mountain retreats for recovery and therapy. Ashley grabbed the papers from Nathan's trembling hands, her eyes scanning the legal language with growing desperation. This is just spite, pure revenge. You're just trying to hurt us. This is protecting my life's work from people who think emotional manipulation equals ownership rights, I replied calmly, and ensuring that my property serves people who've actually sacrificed something for their country. Nathan's face had gone ashen as the financial implications hit him like a freight train. Our plans, our future, we counted on that villa to solve our housing problems. Perhaps you should have asked permission before making those plans. Or better yet, perhaps you should have verified that your wife was telling you the truth about my involvement. I spread additional documents across the coffee table, each one representing another nail in the coffin of Ashley's schemes. The charitable transfer includes a lifetime usage clause for me as the donor. I retain full access to the property until my death, along with my new role as volunteer coordinator for the Veterans Foundation Retreat Program. So, nothing changes for you. Ashley's voice climbed toward complete hysteria. You still get to use it whenever you want. Everything changes, I corrected her, meeting her eyes with the kind of steady gaze I'd used in difficult business negotiations. You no longer have any claim to it, ever. No inheritance, no family access, no legal standing whatsoever. Carl Walsh spoke for the first time since entering my house, his voice barely above a whisper. So we get nothing? After everything we've been through? After participating in an attempt to steal my property through psychological manipulation and fraud? That's correct. You get exactly what you deserve. Margaret Walsh began crying quietly, the kind of soft weeping that comes from years of disappointment and broken promises. Carl patted her shoulder with the helpless gestures of a man who'd never understood how they'd arrived at this moment of complete humiliation. Ashley stared at the legal documents as though they might dissolve under her gaze if she concentrated hard enough. The charity thing? That's just a trick, right? Some way to maintain control while making us think we've lost? Preston had prepared me for this exact question during our planning sessions. The Blue Ridge Veterans Foundation is a legitimate 501c3 charitable organization that's been operating in Georgia for over 20 years. The transfer is genuine, legally binding, and completely irrevocable. I no longer own the property, Ashley. I'm simply the lifetime resident and volunteer coordinator. So, you win, Nathan said bitterly, his voice carrying the defeated tone of someone who'd just realized he'd been played by his own wife. Is that what you wanted to hear? I wanted to hear nothing from any of you, I replied honestly. But since you insisted on this conflict, since you chose manipulation over communication, theft over respect, yes, I win. Ashley's carefully constructed composure finally cracked completely. All the planning, all the legal research, all the confidence she'd built up over the past week collapsed like a house of cards. You've destroyed our future. Nathan's parents have nowhere to go. We had plans. They can go anywhere except my former villa, and your plans should have included asking permission before involving other people's property. Nathan stood on unsteady legs, his face a mask of exhaustion and barely controlled anger. Not at me, I realized, but at Ashley. The man had just discovered that his wife had lied to him about a major property acquisition, involved his elderly parents in what amounted to a theft scheme, and potentially exposed him to legal liability for fraud. Come on, he said to his parents, his voice hollow. There's nothing left to discuss here. As the four of them filed toward my front door, I called out one final observation that I'd been saving for this moment. Ashley? She turned back, her face streaked with tears and twisted with the kind of rage that comes from complete defeat. Next time you try to manipulate someone, remember that business experience beats emotional terrorism every time. And next time you want to help someone, try using your own resources instead of stealing from family. The door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo through my suddenly quiet house. I sat in my recliner, surrounded by the legal documents that had just ended a war I'd never wanted to fight, feeling something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Complete peace of mind. Austin called an hour later, his voice filled with curiosity about how the confrontation had gone. They took it about as well as you'd expect, I told him. Ashley's furious, Nathan's devastated that his wife lied to him, and his parents are probably wondering how they got involved in this mess. Any chance they'll try to challenge the charitable transfer? Preston says it's bulletproof. Besides, Ashley would have to admit in court that she was trying to steal property that didn't belong to her. I don't think even she's that desperate. So what's next for you, Bob? I looked around my house, taking in the photos of Sarah and the awards from Thompson Logistics, thinking about the veterans who would soon be using my mountain villa to heal from their service-related trauma. I think it's time to start the next chapter of my life, one that involves helping people who actually deserve help. 30 years of logistics contracts had taught me to always have an exit strategy and contingency plans for when deals went bad. I'd never imagined I'd need to apply those same principles to my own family, but sometimes life forces you to protect yourself from the people you love most. I gathered my copies of the legal documents and walked toward my truck, keys in hand. Time to drive up to the Blue Ridge Mountains and enjoy my villa in complete peace, knowing that it would soon serve a purpose far more noble than my daughter's greed had ever envisioned. Thursday morning brought the first sunrise in 2 years that I could watch without fear, anger, or defensive calculation running through my mind. I drove to the Blue Ridge Mountains through Georgia's spring landscape, feeling something I'd almost forgotten existed, simple contentment mixed with genuine purpose. The villa welcomed me back with the silence of a house that belonged once again entirely to its rightful mission. I used my key without checking over my shoulder for hostile family members, entered without listening for Ashley's dismissive voice, walked through rooms that held memories of recent technological warfare, but somehow felt cleansed by their new charitable purpose. My first task was a thorough inspection to ensure Austin had successfully removed all traces of our elaborate revenge theater. The cameras came down without leaving any mounting evidence, motion sensors had been carefully extracted from their hiding places, and the sophisticated audio system that had terrorized the Walsh family was completely gone. Within an hour, I'd confirmed that the villa had returned to its natural state as a peaceful mountain retreat. No blinking lights monitoring invisible approaches, no hidden microphones recording conversations, no technological defenses waiting to spring into action against unauthorized visitors. just a house in the mountains owned by a veterans charity, occupied by a man who no longer needed to protect himself from his own family's greed. I made coffee using the same machine that had witnessed the weekend's chaos, then carried my mug to the deck where Sarah and I had shared countless peaceful mornings during our marriage. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched before me, their peaks reflecting the late morning sun in patterns that seemed to dance with possibility rather than threat. For the first time since my wife's death, I sat completely still without my mind racing through defensive strategies or contingency plans. The transformation felt almost mystical in its completeness. 2 years ago, I'd been a broken widower who confused love with surrender, kindness with weakness, family loyalty with accepting psychological abuse. The man who had built Thompson Logistics from a single delivery truck into Georgia's largest independent shipping company had somehow forgotten how to protect his own boundaries when it came to his daughter. Sarah's voice whispered through memory, but clearer now, unfiltered by grief and Ashley's manipulation of my emotions. "Be patient with Ashley," she'd said during those final conversations. "She's processing her loss differently than you are." But Sarah had never meant for patience to become permanent victimhood. She'd never suggested that love required accepting theft, manipulation, and emotional terrorism. The woman who'd married a determined businessman and supported him through 25 years of building a company wouldn't have wanted him to become a doormat, even for their daughter. "Kindness without self-respect isn't kindness at all," I said aloud to the empty deck and the listening mountains. "It's just weakness disguised as virtue." The mountain peaks surrounding the villa seemed to nod in agreement with this hard-won wisdom. Nature itself demonstrated the importance of boundaries everywhere I looked. Waters stayed within their banks until they carved new channels through determination and time. Mountains maintained their foundations against every storm. Seasons changed according to their own rhythms, regardless of human demands or expectations. Ashley had spent 2 years systematically testing my boundaries, discovering through careful experimentation that they could be moved, dissolved, or ignored entirely depending on how much emotional pressure she applied. Each successful manipulation had taught her that love meant capitulation, that family ties guaranteed unlimited access to everything I owned or earned. I had taught her that destructive lesson through my own behavior, every check I'd written to solve her financial problems, every demand I'd accepted without question, every time I'd chosen temporary peace over lasting respect. The technological revenge had been satisfying in its immediate impact, but ultimately unnecessary for achieving my real goal. The genuine victory was simpler and more permanent than any smart home system, learning to say no without guilt. Learning that protecting myself wasn't cruelty, but basic emotional health. Learning that some relationships cannot survive the introduction of genuine boundaries, and that's not always a tragedy. My phone had remained silent for 72 hours now. No frantic calls from Ashley seeking reconciliation, no threats from Nathan about legal challenges, no desperate attempts to find loopholes in the charitable transfer. They had finally understood what I'd discovered in Preston's office. The war was over, and they had lost completely and permanently. But more important than their defeat was my own recovery. The grieving widower who had mistaken exploitation for love was gone forever. In his place sat a man who remembered his own worth, who understood that genuine kindness required strength rather than weakness, who had rediscovered that protecting himself was actually an act of love. Love for Sarah's memory, love for his own dignity, and love for the possibility that relationships built on mutual respect might still exist somewhere in his future. The afternoon sun warmed my face as I finished my coffee and considered the strange mathematics of family relationships. Ashley had calculated that emotional manipulation plus financial pressure plus threats of permanent estrangement would equal unlimited access to my assets. She'd never considered that trauma plus time plus strategic thinking plus professional help might equal a father who finally learned to protect himself and others who truly deserved assistance. The Blue Ridge Mountains' eternal calm reflected a truth I was finally ready to accept completely. Some battles end not with reconciliation, but with the understanding that peace requires distance. Some love expresses itself most genuinely through boundaries rather than surrender. Next month, the first group of disabled veterans would arrive for their therapeutic retreat. I would be here to welcome them, to help coordinate their programs to ensure that my villa served people who had actually sacrificed something meaningful for others. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like myself again. And for the first time since Sarah's death, I was genuinely excited about the future.